Yoshi, Yoshi, Yoshi. There is a decent chance that Yoshi is about to have a big, immediate future at Nintendo, and in this video we're going to look at what that might mean. We will deep dive the creatives responsible for the franchise so far, the teams who might be involved going forward, the struggles the franchise has faced to date, and the future we might expect to see. The second Super Mario Bros. Movie seems primed to feature the egg-loving dino in a significant way, and the company has been happily resurrecting franchises as obscure as Famicom Detective Club and Another Code, so the chances of Yoshi returning to gaming have to be high from an outside perspective. Odds are surely 90% he's at least going to show up in a game by the end of 2026, but his own series is also due a resuscitation. His last solo outing dropped in March 2019. Yoshi's Crafted World was by Goodfeel, the same team who developed Yoshi's Woolly World for the company, although it received a rather cooler reception. Goodfeel seem to like to mix it up in terms of the Nintendo franchises they get involved with. They've also handled Kirby, Wario Land, and Princess Peach in the last couple of decades, so this doesn't feel an equivalent situation to Mercury Steam or Grezzo, where things look good for the developers to remain with the series for the long term necessarily. If Nintendo want Yoshi to continue, therefore, they're going to need to think about it strategically. And I think they certainly do want Yoshi to continue, not just because they like keeping all their different franchises moving, especially those tangential to the highly profitable Mario franchise, but also because Yoshi is unusual in that he appeals to younger gamers who are a big focus for Nintendo at all times. Now, I have been on the train for a long time, at least as far back as February this year, but probably before, that Yoshi's Woolly World has a very good chance to make the jump in the next year or so. With the 2D Donkey Kong series in a bit of a development hiatus, they plugged the gap after May 2018's Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze with Donkey Kong Country Returns HD in January 2025. Releasing Yoshi's Woolly World in late 2025 or early 2026 would represent a similar period as there were between the two 2D Donkey Kong games, and it would kick the need to think too much about the future of the Yoshi series into the long grass, since Woolly World has always been one of the most celebrated games of this series. The fact that it appeared, seemingly by accident, in a Nintendo infographic earlier this year has only alerted more people to this likelihood. Still, Nintendo can't rest indefinitely on remaking old Yoshi content. They probably have more leeway with Yoshi than most, since, to a younger audience, games don't need to be brand new to play as new if they haven't encountered them before. It's theoretically possible that if they drop Yoshi's Woolly World in early 2026 and stick a Plus game onto Yoshi's Crafted World in 2030, they could see out the Switch 2 generation, having at least tipped their hats to Yoshi at several points along the way, without ever committing to a full new title. However, this would be very much a short-term fix. Long-term, things are a lot more complicated. I've talked in separate videos about the importance to Nintendo of deeply understanding what makes their game franchises tick, of how Yoshiaki Koizumi would openly muse about the nature of Mario even after working on many Mario titles. Would Famicom Detective Club have returned if not for the fact that Yoshio Sakamoto, the writer of The Girl Who Stands Behind, was still at the company and in a senior production position? Possibly, but it feels like a much bigger reach. Even on Donkey Kong Bonanza, a team with minimal previous connection to Donkey Kong except for some of EPD8's longer-term veterans who worked on Jungle Beat in the early 2000s, the development began by interviewing Miyamoto and Koizumi about the key features that were needed to understand Donkey Kong. For Nintendo's craftsmanlike approach, they require an institutional understanding of these games. However, Nintendo's relationship with Goodfeel has always been rather different. Goodfeel's president and creative lead, Etsunobu Obisu, is a respected figure from his days at Konami, and he always seems to have been given a good deal more latitude than other Nintendo developers. It's usual, even where Nintendo collaborate with other teams, to see core Nintendo people in very senior positions, director, producer, even when these teams have very strong independent reputations such as Monolith Soft and Intelligent Systems. But Goodfeel have been afforded a good deal more latitude. I've talked before in my video about Wario Land. that in the development of that game, very little of the usual due diligence to deeply understand the history of these titles appears to have been undertaken. Perhaps at the time this was fine. Shigeru Miyamoto was still in a senior game development position, and his manner of managing seemed to be to let people broadly do what they wanted, but then come in midway through and throw a complete curveball into the proceedings. The Link Awakening developers talked about how they had very little supervision because Miyamoto was busy on other things, while Retro Studios experienced the man at his most cryptic when he arrived and said, "What would it be like if Samus had a bug's head?" But since 2015, leadership of the game development wing has been in the hands not of Shigeru Miyamoto, but of Shinya Takahashi, and the approach he has employed has been pretty consistent. Mercury Steam, Mages, Way Forward, Arc System Works, and others are schooled in the art of a game by remaking it, and then, if that is a success, they may be rehired to do an original entry. And, where at all possible, they really want to involve the long-standing producers, Aonuma, Sakamoto, and others, to ensure that the series remains true to the core principles that started it off. This presents a problem for Yoshi because it's not necessarily obvious that Nintendo has a real point person for the Yoshi series who can take over in the same way that Kosuke Ibuki has taken over from Hideki Kono on Mario Kart, or how Hidemaru Fujibayashi has nearly 30 years experience of Zelda despite being still 10 years younger than Eiji Aonuma. Obviously, the producer of the series has been Takashi Tezuka. Tezuka-san is in his mid-60s, but while retirement is certainly possible for him, he has a role in the Nintendo hierarchy as an executive officer with overall management responsibilities in the company, and it seems quite plausible that he will continue at least as a sort of grand advisor for quite a long time to come. Tezuka has said in interviews before that Yoshi is his favourite character, and he was reportedly one of the people pushing for Yoshi to get his own spin-off in the Super NES original Yoshi's Island. He has continued to produce every Yoshi game since, although these have always been outside contracts. His EPD Group 10 team itself have focused on the side-scrolling Mario, Mario Maker, and Pikmin series primarily over the years, although probably because of his depth of experience, Tezuka has also helped support the development of other teams' titles such as Clubhouse Games, Zelda Breath of the Wild, and ARMS. Perhaps the most likely person to take on Yoshi is Kenta Usui. Uniquely of the core programming and course design team from the original Yoshi, he has stuck with the franchise through every iteration. Usui was the course designer on the original Super Mario World 2, as well as Super Mario 64. He directed Super Mario Sunshine, but while the rest of the Sunshine team decamped to Tokyo to set up the team that is now known as EPD Production Group 8, he remained in Kyoto as the level designer for Yoshi's New Island, Yoshi's Woolly World, and Yoshi's Crafted World, as well as being involved in several of the new Super Mario Bros. Titles, Hey Pikmin and Good Job. His most recent work was on Splatoon 3 and the expansion pass, working on game design, however. This makes it feel less likely to me that he will be working on an original Yoshi title at the moment, although, to be fair, he has also averaged a game every year or so before now, so a 2026 Yoshi title would kind of fit, assuming he's parting ways with the Splatoon team. Also, as he's in his late 50s, this is hardly the kind of generational transition that the franchise may need for its very long-term future. Therefore, I actually think Yoshi is a candidate for a more aggressive restart than we've seen before with many franchises. We have the Bonanza precedent where a new team within Nintendo grew a brand new 3D team, but another precedent in many respects is Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Although notionally still under Tezuka and from EPD-10, it benefited hugely from the arrival of the Super Mario Odyssey producer Koichi Hayashida to support director Shiro Mori, who himself was relatively new to side-scrolling Mario, having come over from the Zelda team to direct the new Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe port before moving on to Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Hayashida is a big name at Nintendo with significant production experience, and although he is in his mid-50s, he has already had a long experience of shepherding these kinds of projects. We've seen this kind of approach from Nintendo before, where a more senior figure becomes an assistant director to an heir apparent. Note Takehiko Hosokawa and Fumi Hayashi on the Mercury Steam Metroid games. The more senior Hosokawa directed Samus Returns while Hayashi assisted, and then they swapped roles on Metroid Dread. Hayashida may feel that he has got Mori's Super Mario Bros. Team onto a good path for future 2D Mario, and certainly Wonder had such an immensely positive reception of the sort that 2D Mario hasn't had for many years. With Takashi Tezuka recently moving from a producer to a senior supervisor on games since Super Mario Bros. Wonder, there may be a gap for Hayashida to take on more of Tezuka's role as one of the key Mario figures. Of course, Hayashida's history has frequently been with the 3D games. He directed Galaxy 2, 3D Land, and 3D World after all. This opens to me the possibility that Nintendo may decide to have Yoshi himself make the transition into the third dimension. Kirby and the Forgotten Land seems to prove that a franchise with a younger skewed audience could find outsized success with a quality 3D experience, and we know that Yoshiaki Koizumi, now the number 2 of the entire game development management operations, asked himself for a 3D Donkey Kong to be put into development. Of course, there's some precedent for Yoshi to have 2.5D elements. Crafted World allows you to flip the stage and enjoy a little bit of depth, so some kind of hybrid of different forms seems completely plausible. I'd certainly expect something more course-based like Hayashida's previous 3D games, and indeed like Kirby and the Forgotten Land, as opposed to something more completely open like Bonanza or Odyssey. Perhaps Yoshi isn't a top priority for getting this level of attention from within the Mario stable of titles, but if not Yoshi, then what else? Let's look at the higher priorities. Donkey Kong now has its own splinter team under the direction of Kazuya Takahashi. 2D Mario is stable under Shiromori. While I've previously suspected that Nintendo software technology has handled the port side of games like Captain Toad and Super Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, people have notified me of the existence of websites from the developers of that game indicating that Nintendo software technology did indeed work extensively on the Bowser's Fury part of the game, and speculation that it may have been a case of the American team completing a Nintendo prototype exists. Therefore, it seems like not the biggest stretch to think that Nintendo may be able to manage two 3D Mario groups concurrently, the major 3D Mario team based in Tokyo, and a splinter group which is a collaboration between the Tokyo team and the Redmond-based Nintendo software technology. Luigi's Mansion is comfortably off as well, with Next Level Games now a wholly owned subsidiary. What's the next biggest core platforming franchise in the Mario universe? Well, perhaps the 2D Donkey Kong team, but I'll discuss that in a separate video. And I think they definitely aspire to do a lot more with Princess Peach as a solo character, but otherwise, by size of audience, it has to be Yoshi next. So that gives us a broad sense of the potential trajectory of the franchise, but now let's get into specifics. I think Yoshi's Woolly World would be fine as a port on its own. But if they're following the Donkey Kong 2025 playbook, well, that series had a 1-2 punch of a 2D port and a 3D return to form headliner title. Under normal circumstances, I'm skeptical about how well a 3D Yoshi would do, but if you are going to launch a major Yoshi revival, surely the 6 months after a major motion picture massively features him would be the time to do it. Look, I think there's a 70% chance we see another Yoshi title before the end of 2027, but it seems plausible to me, I'm thinking 30%, that we get 2 Yoshi games in this time period, and if we do, the second one would almost certainly contrast with Woolly World and be a different type of title. That doesn't necessarily mean a 3D game, a puzzle title might do it, but a 3D Yoshi is a low-hanging apple for Nintendo to stick its tongue out for. Even if they miss the 2026 window for Yoshi though, I still think the character is likely to have a major regeneration within the Switch 2 era, and I think a 3D Yoshi is a 30% shout by the end of 2029. Now, it's possible, of course, that Goodfield could return to Yoshi, either in collaboration with Hayashida or just with something under their own steam. They have 3D platforming credentials of their own, not just with Princess Peach Showtime, but also their own independent project, the well-received Bakaru. But given their interest in varied game experiences and the fact that they've already done 2 Yoshi titles, the question has to be whether Goodfield are the right producers for the long term. In theory, they could follow the same kind of pattern as Next Level Games. Next Level Games have alternated between Luigi's Mansion and competitive multiplayer experiences for quite some years now, with Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon in 2013, Metroid Prime Federation Force in 2016, Luigi's Mansion 3 in 2019, and Mario Strikers Battle League in 2022. It feels likely, especially now that they are a wholly owned subsidiary, that they will keep managing multiple properties for Nintendo, and Goodfield would be able to indulge their originality with their own creator-owned projects like Bakaru, while they accept a couple of commissions a generation from Nintendo, a Yoshi game and a non-Yoshi game fitting the bill, and they wouldn't even need to return to 2D Yoshi for their next project after Showtime, since Woolly World would happily play as new to the vast number of Switch and Switch 2 owners who never saw the game on Wii U or even 3DS. For more on Nintendo's future game development projects, check out the video on screen. Huge thanks to the channel's Patreon supporters, and thank you so much for watching. I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.